You know, Mr. Tarantino, there's been talk that this latest film of yours is going to be your penultimate slash second to last film that you're ever going to direct. There's also been talk that you may helm a Star Trek film in the future. Like Star Trek, and is that going to count to your 10 directorial efforts and then you're done plan? What was that? Well, I guess so. Whether or not that is going to be the case, I just want to say thank you for your contributions to an industry and art form that you love so dearly, as do I, and that you've changed forever. What is up, everybody? Random Man here, bringing you my review for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Set in 1969 Los Angeles, the plot of this dramedy film basically follows a fictional aging TV actor played by Leonardo DiCaprio and his stunt double and longtime friend played by Brad Pitt as they navigate the changing Hollywood film industry. Going into this movie, I couldn't have been more excited. This was my most anticipated movie of 2019 for 2 words and 2 words alone. Quentin Tarantino. Yes, he is one of my all-time favorite filmmakers, easily in my top 10. And over the course of his almost 3-decade-long movie career, he has crafted some of the finest movies out there. Starting out with his debut film Reservoir Dogs, he made a landmark stamp on independent filmmaking. And speaking of that film, I marathoned all of his filmography, save for Death Proof, leading up to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. With Death Proof, I'll quickly say that it is probably my least favorite film that Tarantino has made, but it's not a bad movie by any means, and it does feature a great car chase, so I'll give it big props for that. But with the rest of the filmography that I marathoned from Tarantino, whether we are talking about films of his such as Reservoir Dogs, which I've already mentioned, his sophomore effort, Pulp Fiction, which needs no introduction. It will continue to be considered his magnum opus and just one of the best movies ever made, period. His 3rd film, Jackie Brown. His 4th film, Kill Bill, which, like Tarantino considers it one movie, I have to agree with that sentiment with both volumes combined together. This is my personal favorite Tarantino film and just one of my favorite movies of all time, period. His 6th movie, Inglourious Basterds. His 7th movie, Django Unchained. And his 8th movie, The Hateful Eight. I have either really enjoyed or flat out adored every movie of Tarantino's filmography. So, it's clear that I was really excited to see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I lied just a minute or so ago in saying that Tarantino was the main reason I'm excited for this film. Not just that, the stacked ensemble of players in this film had me uber excited for it as well. The concept, it surrounding the Manson murders, it taking place in 1969 Hollywood, all of it coming together, it looked like my cup of tea, and I just wanted to see what Tarantino had to offer up this time, as for me personally, it's a special occasion because it's the first Tarantino film that I am seeing and reviewing in theaters, so that was cause for celebration as well. Starting out with the cast and the performances, like I've said, we have a stacked ensemble of players. It's literally an Avengers level style cast, and Tarantino in the past is no stranger to having a bunch of big names in his movies. He's actually been doing it for a long time, even before the Marvel Cinematic Universe took shape. And with all of these people, I'm mainly going to mention the standouts in my opinion, my favorite members of the cast. So in short, I will say that everyone and anyone that shows up in this film in a big or small role, they're all simply great. But the actors I do have to single out the most for praise here include the likes of Leonardo DiCaprio as Rick Dalton, This is his first acting role since 2015's The Revenant, and after he actually won the Best Actor Oscar for that film. And comparing it to some of his past performances, he's as great as always, just like I said with the rest of the ensemble here. But in comparison to some of the more suave and in-control roles he's had in the past, here he gives a very insecure kind of performance, a very worked up and not sure of himself kind of take of this aging and fading TV star who's had a tough time transitioning into movies. The standout scene for him is the one where he's freaking out in his trailer after doing a scene for this Western show, and yeah, it's great stuff. I mean, DiCaprio always brings his A game to the table. The same very much applies to Brad Pitt as Cliff Booth, the stunt double and longtime friend to Rick Dalton. I have to say right off the bat that this is not just one of Pitt's best roles and performances that he has done in recent memory, but probably in his entire career as well. This character oozes coolness factors with him. And what also makes him so great is the chemistry with DiCaprio. It's the first time we've ever seen these two last remaining movie stars in real life ever work together on screen, as it's been described by Tarantino that their friendship and their chemistry in this film is like Paul Newman and Robert Redford's in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And I don't disagree. These two, when they have scenes together, they're very synergetic. You get the feeling that these two have been friends for a long, long, long time, and that they are two halves of one whole whenever they're together on screen. And with Pitt's character too, he just stood out to me the most of the main players. Then the third biggest billed member of the cast is Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate. Tate was the real-life actress who was viciously murdered by some members of the Manson family cult while she was 8 months pregnant, and she was also married to the now infamous filmmaker Roman Polanski. What I'll say of her performance for now is that I did think she did a pretty outstanding job as well for the screen time that she did have. She looked like Tate, she acted like Tate from what I am familiar with the real life actress. With the rest of the cast, there are so many more players here as I have mentioned before, but other standouts that I do have to single out for the most praise include Mike Moe as Bruce Lee. It was so amazing to see this guy not just have a striking resemblance to the real life legendary actor, but the scene that he specifically has with Brad Pitt's Cliff Booth was hilarious, which goes into the rest of the humor of this film. There's also Margaret Qualley as Kat, the fictional member of the Manson family cult who eventually connects with Brad Pitt's character Cliff Booth. She's also a hippie. We get to see more of her and Pitt's character after they connect after a specific point of the film, and I won't get into more of that because there is quite a bit here that is spoiler territory. But there are other members of the cast here that include Tarantino veterans like Kurt Russell, Zoe Bell, Michael Madsen. And the final two cast members I gotta shout out here are Julia Butters and Sayuri. Butters plays Trudy Frazier, this young actress who shares some moments with DiCaprio's Dalton, and I thought that she was superb. And then Sayuri is actually not a human actor. This is the dog actor that portrays the dog of Cliff Booth, Brandy. And I I have a soft spot for animals in films, especially ones like these that do stand out even in the most subtle of moments. Yeah, I thought that Sayuri was great as Brandy. So overall with the cast, as I mentioned, in simple terms, everyone is great here. But I think that the three standouts are, of course, the three main leads, DiCaprio, Pitt, and Robbie. The writing of this film, and by extension, the directing by Quentin Tarantino, makes it very clear, as he has so demonstrated many, many times in the past, given how this is his 9th film, that it doesn't follow traditional storytelling in film. This movie is structured around 3 specific days in 1969. The first two are a couple of back-to-back ones in February of that year, and then the final one is August 8th, 1969, which eventually rolls over into August 9th in the early hours of it after midnight. Across those 3 days, we do follow our three main characters played by DiCaprio, Pitt, and Robbie, and that's literally what we witness across the 2-hour and 40-minute running time of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. We are literally witnessing how they go about their day-to-day lives, and in that sense, the narrative is really loose. Tarantino has famously made movies that follow non-linear structures, and with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it is not traditional in the way it is told, but specifically in it playing out similarly to another film of his third movie, Jackie Brown. And if you've seen that film, then you know that the film in question is unlike his other movies, as it is not as bombastic, it's not as violent, it's more mellow and easygoing in the way that characters have drawn out conversations, the other dialogue that is given in between, and there is build up to what is specifically driving the plot forward until it all concludes by the end. That very much applies to this film in many, many ways. It's a film that is easily the most laid back of Tarantino's filmography, and I can attest to this for me having marathoned the overwhelming majority of his films, which it also made me see how much he has grown as a filmmaker. I think that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is his most mature film yet, as it is clear that he is fully in his element, control of just about every aspect of telling the story he wanted to tell and showing us what he wanted to show visually. And for that, I give zero fault to Tarantino in that regard, especially in the way that all of what we see and hear, it is also precisely honed in to such a masterful degree. We get sequences like Rick Dalton filming scenes for a TV show that he's a part of. We get scenes like Cliff Booth riding around Hollywood, and we even get scenes like Sharon Tate picking up a book from a bookstore and then going across the street to a local theater that is showing one of her films, The Wrecking Crew, which starred her and Dean Martin. And we see her reactions and the audience's reactions to the film. Moments like those made me feel like I was watching a slice of life film as done by Tarantino, complete with all of the Tarantino-isms we have come to expect from the filmmaker, such as his signature dialogue scenes with some witty conversations in and out of different sequences, his love, his big love of pop culture, especially for this specific time period, and his knowledge of film all over the place, his appreciation for female feet, everything that this guy is known for, his trademarks are here. One of those things being the comedy that Tarantino has laced a bunch of his films in, even if there are serious undertones across their narratives. And I've got to say that this is the funniest film that I've seen Tarantino write and direct. And it also spills over into what an inspired filmmaker he is on a technical level. Him, along with the rest of the collaborators that make movies possible, they have crafted something that would be an understatement to say is so visually enamoring. Right down to Robert Richardson's cinematography, this guy having done the camera work for a lot of Tarantino's past films. It is simply gorgeous. The production design in this movie looking so authentic to 1969 Hollywood. Real life streets in LA were shut down to have this city recreated to look as it did 50 years ago. Even other details like the way characters looked, the way they dressed, the music blaring out of radios, and it just backing up that we are in this time period. This movie cost a pretty penny, specifically $90 to $96 million, so just south of $100 million in its total budget. And with a filmmaker like Tarantino, he used all of his resources to the max. It's all edited neatly with scene transitions and even the way scenes played out, in my opinion, to a precise degree as well. And in speaking of the editing connecting to the pace of the film, this movie runs at a meaty running time of 2 hours and 40 minutes. So this, along with his previous two films, Django Unchained and The Hateful Eight, all run at a similar running time at about 2 hours and 40 minutes or so. This is something that is really big to consider when going into this film as well, because Tarantino is a filmmaker that does love to have scenes drag on and linger and have tension with them as well, because he is somebody who is about creating moments and also using his trademark Tarantino-isms, whether it's the aesthetication of violence, all over conversations that do contribute to what characters do. This is a factor that I easily will and have seen people comment on in having an effect on the movie's pace and it dragging to such an extraneous degree that they find the movie boring or they found it inconsequential. But in my opinion, I found really little fault with the way this movie played out with its pacing. Did it need to be this long in theory? No. But at the same time, Tarantino, I know for a fact, had filmed so much more footage than the stuff that him and his editor have compiled together. So for me, it was more of a factor of me already highly enjoying all of the attributes that this film has for me to even care or notice the running time. For me, it's really hard to find any major issues with this film because, like I've said, I was so into this movie throughout its lengthy running time. And if I really had to dig for issues, one thing that did stand out does specifically have to do with the integration of Sharon Tate. Now, this is no fault of Margot Robbie's performance. As I've mentioned, I think that she is a standout in terms of the performers here. But the way she is utilized, at a very basic level, she is underdeveloped as a character, even though we do see quite a bit of her throughout, just not as much as DiCaprio's Rick Dalton or Brad Pitt's Cliff Booth. We really don't see much of a purpose to her other than connecting what does eventually happen. With that being said, though, I think that Tarantino's intention in using Margot Robbie's Sharon Tate across this narrative in the specific moments that she was in helped further frame the narrative and define what he was specifically trying to tell. And I think he was also being careful in using a real-life figure such as Tate in a movie like this to a tasteful degree, at least in terms of what Tarantino does see fit, which he has gotten flack for as of late. On that note too, Tarantino is not one without controversy, as this directly goes into what is done in the final half hour or so of the film, the sequence taking place across August 8th to 9th, 1969. Now, if you've seen a Tarantino film in the past, it shouldn't be so shocking to see what does occur and what he does do with his revisionist history that he previously did with Inglourious Basterds. And what he did with it, I ate up so much. I loved where the movie went, and I think it also had to do with the aforementioned comedy as well. But I know there are those out there that are already divided and will continue to be split on what does happen at the end. To that I say, with not just me loving what I saw, but what goes into the core of this movie specifically, as it is called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In its title, it makes it clear that it is a fairy tale of sorts. It's all pure fantasy, pure escapism, and what I have experienced with Tarantino's latest effort, it is pure, masterful cinematic bliss, to say the least. As I said, Tarantino has not made traditional movies before. And this certainly follows in the same line of being different, not just for difference's sake, but with how Tarantino is somebody who consistently is making original and creative content that I so crave to see in film, and we don't often get to see nowadays. And with Tarantino making this film, it's not just a commentary on what we had back then in 1969 compared to today, but also in us seeing what stars are made of, not just in the sky, but of course those we see in front of and behind the camera. And to that, Mr. Tarantino has done it again. If you're a massive fan of Tarantino or are a film fan in general, like me on both accounts, this is without a doubt a must-see. If you don't fall into either of those camps, or if you don't know what to expect going into this movie, if you're seeing it out of the blue, I think you have to know what you're getting into. And I do think that there is something in here for everybody to get out of, if you're in the appropriate mindset, given, again, the filmmaker and what he's done in the past, and what this movie is comprised of. Comparing it to the rest of Tarantino's filmography, this isn't his best effort. I don't even know if this would necessarily land in my top 5 favorite films of his. I would have to rewatch this film and further assess for myself. But I gotta say that for me, I think that this movie will benefit from rewatches and picking out certain details that I missed the first time, and to get into the dialogue and more of the character interactions. This is my favorite fictional narrative film of the year thus far, and I make that specific distinction because my favorite film of 2019 up until I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was the documentary Apollo 11, which coincidentally to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is about something that took place famously in 1969. And that's such a remarkable coincidence that my 2 favorite films of the year thus far both take place in the same year, 50 years ago. And they couldn't be more different from each other. And given how it's a documentary, of course, this is playing out real life events, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood being fictional, it's playing out something that is pure imagination from somebody who really does have something in him that is full of passion, just like the passion that the astronauts and rest of NASA did in achieving such a landmark moment for humanity. I loved Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. If you couldn't already tell, I highly recommend it. My final verdict for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is 4.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.